Chapter 54 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 54. The bachelor, among his various occupations, found in the old church a constant source of interest and amusement. Taking that pride in it which men conceive for the wonders of their own little world, he had made its history his study, and many a summer day within its walls, and many a winter's night beside the parsonage fire, had found the bachelor still poring over, and adding to, his goodly store of tale and legend. As he was not one of those rough spirits who would strip fair truth of every little shadowy vestment in which time and teeming fancies love to array her, and some of which become her pleasantly enough, serving, like the waters of her well, to add new graces to the charms they half conceal and half suggest, and to awaken interest and pursuit rather than languor and indifference. As, unlike this stern and obdurate class, he loved to see the goddess crowned with those garlands of wild flowers which tradition wreaths for her gentle wearing, and which are often freshest in their homeliest shapes. He trod with a light step, and bore with a light hand upon the dust of centuries, unwilling to demolish any of the airy shrines that had been raised above it, if any good feeling or affection of the human heart were hiding thereabouts. Thus, in the case of an ancient coffin of rough stone, supposed for many generations to contain the bones of a certain baron, who, after ravaging, with cut and thrust and plunder, in foreign lands, came back with a penitent and sorrowing heart to die at home, but which had been lately shown by learned antiquaries to be no such thing, as the baron in question, so they contended, had died hard in battle, gnashing his teeth and cursing with his latest breath. The bachelor stoutly maintained that the old tale was the true one, that the baron, repenting him of the evil, had done great charities, and meekly given up the ghost, and that if ever baron went to heaven, that baron was then at peace. In like manner, when the aforesaid antiquaries did argue and contend that a certain secret vault was not the tomb of a grey-haired lady who had been hanged and drawn and quartered by glorious Queen Bess for succouring a wretched priest who fainted of thirst and hunger at her door, the bachelor did solemnly maintain, against all comers, that the church was hallowed by the said poor lady's ashes, that her remains had been collected in the night from 4 of the city's gates, and thither in secret brought and there deposited. And the bachelor did further, being highly excited at such times, deny the glory of Queen Bess, and assert the immeasurably greater glory of the meanest woman in her realm who had a merciful and tender heart. As to the assertion that the flat stone near the door was not the grave of the miser who had disowned his only child and left a sum of money to the church to buy a peal of bells, the bachelor did readily admit the same, and that the place had given birth to no such man. In a word, he would have had every stone and plate of brass the monument only of deeds whose memory should survive. All others he was willing to forget. They might be buried in consecrated ground, but he would have had them buried deep, and never brought to light again. It was from the lips of such a tutor that the child learnt her easy task. Already impressed beyond all telling by the silent building and the peaceful beauty of the spot in which it stood, majestic age surrounded by perpetual youth, it seemed to her, when she heard these things sacred to all goodness and virtue. It was another world, where sin and sorrow never came, a tranquil place of rest, where nothing evil entered. When the bachelor had given her in connection with almost every tomb and flat gravestone some history of its own, he took her down into the old crypt, now a mere dull vault, and showed her how it had been lighted up in the time of the monks, and how, amid lamps depending from the roof, and swinging censers exhaling scented odours, and habits glittering with gold and silver, and pictures and precious stuffs, and jewels all flashing and glistening through the low arches, the chaunt of aged voices had been many a time heard there, at midnight, in old days, while hooded figures knelt and prayed around, and told their rosaries of beads. Thence he took her above ground again, and showed her, high up in the old walls, small galleries where the nuns had been wont to glide along, dimly seen in their dark dresses so far off, or to pause, like gloomy shadows, listening to the prayers. He showed her, too, how the warriors whose figures rested on the tombs had worn those rotting scraps of armour up above; how this had been a helmet, and that a shield, and that a gauntlet, and how they had wielded the great two-handed swords, and beaten men down with yonder iron mace. All that he told the child, she treasured in her mind; and sometimes, when she awoke at night from dreams of those old times, and rising from her bed looked out at the dark church, she almost hoped to see the windows lighted up, and hear the organs swell, and sound of voices on the rushing wind. The old sexton soon got better, and was about again. From him the child learnt many other things, though of a different kind. He was not able to work, but one day there was a grave to be made, and he came to overlook the man who dug it. He was in a talkative mood, and the child, at first standing by his side, and afterwards sitting on the grass at his feet, with her thoughtful face raised towards his, began to converse with him. Now, the man who did the sexton's duty was a little older than he, though much more active, but he was deaf; and when the sexton, who peradventure, on a pinch, might have walked a mile with great difficulty in half a dozen hours, exchanged a remark with him about his work, the child could not help noticing that he did so with an impatient kind of pity for his infirmity, as if he were himself the strongest and heartiest man alive. 'I am sorry to see there is this to do,' said the child when she approached. 'I heard of no one having died.' 'She lived in another hamlet, my dear,' returned the sexton, 3 mile away.' 'Was she young?' 'Yes,' said the sexton. 'Not more than 64, I think. David, was she more than 64? David, who was digging hard, heard nothing of the question. The sexton, as he could not reach to touch him with his crutch, and was too infirm to rise without assistance, called his attention by throwing a little mould upon his red nightcap. 'What's the matter now?' said David, looking up. 'How old was Becky Morgan?' asked the sexton. 'Becky Morgan?' repeated David. 'Yes,' replied the sexton, adding in a half compassionate, half irritable tone, which the old man couldn't hear, 'You're getting very deaf, Davy, very deaf to be sure.' The old man stopped in his work, and cleansing his spade with a piece of slate he had by him for the purpose, and scraping off, in the process, the essence of heaven knows how many Becky Morgans, set himself to consider the subject. 'Let me think,' quoth he. 'I saw last night what they had put upon the coffin. Was it 79? No, no,' said the sexton. 'Ah, yes, it was though,' returned the old man with a sigh, 'for I remember thinking she was very near our age. Yes, it was 79. Are you sure you didn't mistake a figure, Davy?' asked the sexton, with signs of some emotion. 'What?' said the old man. 'Say that again.' 'He's very deaf. He's very deaf indeed,' cried the sexton petulantly. 'Are you sure you're right about the figures?' 'Oh, quite,' replied the old man. 'Why not?' 'He's exceedingly deaf,' muttered the sexton to himself. 'I think he's getting foolish.' The child rather wondered what had led him to this belief, as, to say the truth, the old man seemed quite as sharp as he, and was infinitely more robust. As the sexton said nothing more just then, however, she forgot it for the time, and spoke again. 'You were telling me,' she said, 'about your gardening. Do you ever plant things here?' 'In the churchyard?' returned the sexton. 'Not I.' 'I have seen some flowers and little shrubs about,' the child rejoined. 'There are some over there, you see. I thought they were of your rearing, though indeed they grow but poorly.
They grow as Heaven wills.